Welcome to this episode of Mysterial Experiences, where we delve into the heart of mystery and the ethereal. Today we invite you on a voyage through shadowed realms of the unexplained. From spectral whispers to cosmic enigmas. Join us as we explore tales and phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, in a quest to uncover truths hidden in the fabric of the extraordinary. Prepare for a journey into the unknown, where each revelation is a step closer to unraveling the mysterious. Welcome back, everybody, to another amazing episode of Mysterial Experiences. I'm your host, as always, Josh Rutledge, and I have a special guest with me here today. We have with us Dr. Bruce Rapuano, and the accolades are extensive, and so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Bruce. And so, has a BA degree from the University of Pennsylvania, majored in neurobiology and minored in psychology, a PhD in neuropharmacology from the University of Connecticut, a JD, I'm not sure what that one is, from New York Law School. Dr. Rapuano has conducted independent biomedical research as a cell biologist at internationally recognized medical institutions, including the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and the Hospital for Special Surgery, both located in New York City. And so you've authored a number of different scientific articles in peer-reviewed medical journals and published articles on topics across the kind of scientific spectrum within your area of focus. But you're coming on the show today because you had a abduction experience, and you penned a book that lays out kind of a premise for what those abduction experiences may be about, or at least how they may be about for you. And so you're bringing that forth from a mainstream scientist perspective. On kind of the topic of abduction and UFO experience. Did I cover anything incorrectly?
No, very good. So far, so good.
All right. So, well, first of all, I think it very, I don't know if you believe in coincidence or anything like synchronicity. Yeah. But I am presently in college for a master's in psychology. And something that I have been toying with lately is writing a book about the consciousness of AI. And so I was already looking for people to reach out within that vein. And so now I've made a contact who has potential input or experience in that realm. So again, synchronistic from that perspective. You sent me a copy of your book. I have read about 3/4 of it. It's a very well-written book, very, I would say, academic in its approach, in that it's, you've got all your resources, where you've cited everything from, where you've pulled everything from, you lay out your premise, and then you provide supporting evidence, then you get into your own case and how that supporting evidence influences your conclusions. And I haven't gotten to your conclusions yet. I'm very intrigued to get there, because you're building very nicely to it. But even though it's an academic book, I would say that it's written also very readable. I mean, you don't have to have a high academic level of achievement or even a high vocabulary to be able to adequately read your book. So I applaud you on that, and preparing a book for the layman, no disrespect meant, but in a way that is very academic in nature.
What I want to say in response to that, Josh, is you're absolutely correct. I had two groups of readers in mind: the general public, and this book was meant from the general public, but even members of the general public that have little or no formal science background might be interested in the type of scientific analysis that someone like myself, who's had all these, UFO close encounter putative alien abduction experiences, might apply to his own experiences. And I've actually done that in an unabridged version where I have, oh gosh, maybe 200, 250 pages more,
Mm-hmm.
almost exclusively of scientific analysis of the, I mentioned the very common experience that abductees have either having implants inserted into their body, having X-rays, CT scans, by done by their primary care doctor that shows they've had some type of device or metallic object inserted into their body. And a lot of the book, in at least the unabridged version, deals with my idea of what these devices might be, what they might represent beyond a tracking device. If because many abductees report experiences that suggest they've been abducted numerous times throughout their life, and so the first function you would imagine for these implants might be a tracking device. But I've also theorized that they may have other functions, and under the general category of a brain-computer interface that may allow not just communication, but between the alien captor and the abductee, but some scientific investigation on the part of the alien of the way our brains work. And so I've devoted a lot of the unabridged version to very in-depth scientific analysis and speculation of exactly what these implants might be, if they are in fact brain-computer interfaces, the materials that might be used in their manufacture, the scientific principles upon which they operate, how they do what they do, and what their function might be. And what I would encourage a lot of readers of the unabridged version to do is, if they have any interest at all, take a look at the unabridged version after they've read the shorter version. But again, I want to have a version available that almost exclusively deals with my personal experiences without the so that there's no, the flow of those experiences that that the reader gets to experience almost firsthand is not interrupted by anything of a in-depth scientific nature. So that's my goal. That was my reason for publishing 2 books.
And I think that, like I said, in what I've read thus far, you certainly accomplished that in the version of the book that I have. And I think that also in thinking about, kind of the nature of the purpose of this podcast is to really show people that this stuff is not uncommon, right? It's people are having these experiences all over the world. I think there was a study that was done back in the 90s. I can't remember the details, but they basically collected reports from across the country, and based on their sample size, they extrapolated to say, X number of people probably are having UFO experiences. John Mack, I think, was a part of that.
The Roper study. It was called the Roper study. Yes.
Yeah. And basically, the extrapolation concluded, several million people were probably having experiences that they probably either didn't discuss it, didn't know about it, or because of the taboo associated with the topic, just kind of kept it to themselves. But so the purpose of this is to let people know that they're not alone. And so the purpose, or that purpose, is echoed, I think, in your book, because you provide so many cases that substantiate the information or the experience that you had, as well as the kind of conclusions that you draw within the book. So again, I think it's anybody can publish a book about their experience, but it takes the time and dedication to look for supporting cases that reinforce the experience that you had. So I applaud you for that as well.
Thank you. Going through all these cases, I mean, I read a lot of the literature, the abduction literature, before really contemplating writing the book. But what I'm doing is in writing the book the way I did, taking the reader through the same experiences I had, when I was reading the literature more and more intensively and began to realize that, gosh, I thought maybe something like that, something that the abductees that were whose cases were investigated by Dr. Mack, David Jacobs, and Bud Hopkins, that those experiences had also happened to me. And it got to a point where I realized I can check just about every box in what I would call the core alien abduction scenario. So that was kind of a stunning realization going through that literature, for the first time. And in writing the book, I kind of did a review of what I'd read previously, just to let the reader experience that same real almost shocking experience that never happened to me, had been replicated in so many ways and so many details in not just hundreds, but thousands or more cases, for all we know, maybe millions. And that's why I organized the book the way I did.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that I've been after for a long time. I think a lot of times when people look at UFO cases, or really any case that is in the realm of the mysterious, so to speak, it's ghost and psychic encounters or whatever the case may be, that most of the attention is placed on the encounter itself and not on the person who experienced the encounter. But I very much for a long time have said that is where the investigation lies. We have collected especially, I belong to the organization MUFON. MUFON has collected, for the last, 70, no, 70, so 30, 50 years, different cases of UFO experience and contact. If there was information to be gleaned about the actual occurrence of a UFO, that would allow us to predict perhaps when the next event could occur. I feel like somebody would have made that correlation to be able to say, hey, they always show up in the southern hemisphere the second half of the year. So like it's just, but that type of correlated data is not really available, and it doesn't really support any type of, at least in my own research, it doesn't really support any type of nothing can be drawn to make a prediction on when the next UFO would occur, which would imply that they're not here. They're not here visiting people as a passive exercise. They're here visiting people as an active exercise, and so it's a matter of looking at and talking with the people who experience UFO sightings, ghost sightings, Bigfoot sightings, etc., to understand how it has impacted them in their own personal lives, in their spiritual lives, in their emotional state, etc., to understand really what I think the goal of these interactions is.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think you touched on it, earlier in the podcast, and this is something that I've heard many investigators say. Some of the other podcasts have been on, the host had mentioned that there is something either unique to the experiencer beforehand, before the abductions began. If not before, then certainly after. There have been studies showing that up to 60, 70, 80% of abductees claim that they've had paranormal experiences that may or may not be related to the UFO alien abduction phenomenon that they didn't have before their abductions began. Unusual abilities, perhaps to tell the future. More often than not, it involves some ability to communicate telepathically. They seem to sense what other people are thinking, or sometimes they're thinking something and people close to them, will give them a phone call and start a conversation on the same topic they were thinking of. And other experiences in the realm of out of body experiences, for lack of a better term, levitation. People may wake up and find that this has happened to me, where you convinced you were levitating, but then fall back suddenly onto your bed. And many people have reported these strange experiences later in their life after they've had a series of abductions. Right. And it's very, very challenging to try to wrap our heads around what is going on. What is the effect of the alien abduction experience in terms of long-term effects on human consciousness, human standard cognitive abilities, or extra sensory abilities, and how does that tie in to the alien agenda? It's there are many theories that would try to explain some of these relationships and try to answer some of these questions. But I'm sure you've come across this particular I call epiphenomenon within the broader alien abduction phenomenon of paranormal events that we're not really sure how they're connected to alien abduction, but their frequency seems to be increased, according to some studies, in a dramatic way.
Yeah, that's why really, this. I didn't feel that there was a good term that it was all encompassing, and I really feel like that all aspects of the quote unquote phenomena, whether it be UFO, paranormal, cryptid, etc., are somehow either tangentially or directly related. And so I created that term mysterial because I felt like that was a good encompassation of everything that happens. But I wrote an article about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. It never went anywhere. I think MUFON published it in their journal, and they misspelled my name. So if anybody has it out there, my name's misspelled. But basically, I call these things USEs, and I use for a reason. I think they're used to trigger in us a reevaluation of the state of our reality for each individual, so that it triggers in us a further prompting to then go and explore what else is out there, what else is in our reality that we may not have perceived or understood. So much of the human eye probably sees all kinds of things that our brain filters out as nonsense or unnecessary to store. And so I think a lot of this stuff is always happening all the time around us all the time. And so our brain just filters it out as noise. But then you have this experience which causes you to re-question the nature of your reality, why you're here, the nature of life, etc. And in doing so, you kind of open a door, you turn on a light in a dark room, and you start to see all these things that have always been there, but now you're starting to see and experience them.
Now, from my point of view, as a scientist, I can't help but be compelled to ask the mechanistic questions. What accounts for this? Is there something? Are there long-term changes happening in the minds and the brains of the abductees? Are we developing new organs of perception where we're now able to perceive other intelligences and in dimensions in our own space-time reality because of the interactions we've had with aliens that have abducted us? Is that their intention? Have they pre-selected people who already have those innate abilities? Are they abducting? Is one of the reasons they're abducting people to genetically modify the human genome so we can develop those organs of perception with the ultimate goal of facilitating some long-term relationship and interaction between the non-human intelligence and right. Homo sapiens? So then, we're talking about the same thing. I'm just asking different questions that were prompted by my particular background.
Exactly, and I think that's really, I think that's why it happens to such a myriad of different types of people because we all approach it differently. And if it's a puzzle that's meant to be solved by the entire species, then it makes sense to expose as many people in that species as possible to the puzzle so that you increase the odds of it being solved.
I just wanted to mention, because it just came to my mind, how remarkable it is to me that within a year of having an abduction experience where I was induced to leave my home in the middle of the night, I think I was 11 or 12 years old, and I um, a very strong feeling that I was going to have some type of contact or interaction with something transcendent. And within a year of that experience, for some reason, I became intensely interested in the field of extrasensory perception. I even thought about in a few years I was going to apply to a university that had the only institute of parapsychology research in the US, which was Duke University. Began not just talking about the subject to my classmates, but my one of my teachers that actually asked me to give a lecture on the subject. That's how fascinated I began
Mm-hmm.
with this subject, not having any interest in it, before the abduction experience. So, what you touch on is this peculiar effect that the abduction experience has on so many of us, which is, in my mind, if you read my book and get to the end of it, you'll see why that's encouraging to me, because I tend to be an optimistic person, but I've offered in the book like a couple of competing conclusions, hypotheses. One
Mm-hmm.
is not so optimistic, where the I hypothesize that the alien agenda is to gain some control over our species and our civilization for their own purposes. The other, more optimistic hypothesis is in the lines of what you've been talking about, that we're being enhanced, um, being allowed to evolve to the next step in
Mm-hmm.
our evolution, with the help of some more advanced non-human intelligence. That's what I hope is happening. But I
Yeah.
have to consider all the possibilities.
Right.
As unpalatable as some of them are, we have to deal with the reality that there's more than one possibility.
Yeah, and I think it's also, and I've talked about this with other guests. The difficulty lies in that we see everything through the human lens, and so when we look at how another race would interact with us, our only basis of comparison is how we have interacted with other life on this planet. And so, of course, we're going to go to the option, if you will, of domination, of colonization, of whatever the case may be, because that's how we've interacted with other life here. But I also don't. I also know that it's hard for us to perceive beyond the experiences of our lifetime, and so it's hard for us to think of a situation where that would not be the case. I think in a lot of cases, when I talk to people who are of the mindset of a invasion or colonization type scenario, when I ask the question, well, what if they don't care about that? The general response is typically that of distrust. Well, what's wrong with them? Why don't they care about us to invade? I mean, like it's a again the fact that we can't not can't. It's hard for most people, I think, to process beyond the limitation of the human experience.
Again, I agree, but I still come back to, you know the high value, of course, as a scientist, I put on the scientific approach. You know, I still would like to use or at least be influenced by the old adage, trust but verify. For
Mm-hmm.
example, I there are reports, there are rumors that the CIA has had access to DNA from hybrids, alien human hybrids. And I would hope that, there are qualified scientists in the right setting that get access to this material and analyze the genome of the alien human hybrid, just to see if novel DNA sequences,
Mhm.
perhaps they represent modified sequences of pre-existing genes, or whether they're completely novel genes that can be detected in the genome of the hybrids, that would suggest that there is some type of reproductive genetic program that is being done for our benefit. But the only way
Mhm.
to show that is to gain the evidence that tends to prove that theory, and that's one of my hopes, that there is there's probably been billions and billions of our taxpayer dollars that have been used to reverse engineer some of the
Right.
technologies used to allow the UFOs to fly. But how much of it is being used to study the biology of the non-human intelligence, and also of this novel, what I call transgenic human species that has been created by the aliens. At least there's a lot of evidence in the
Mhm.
abduction literature that such a species has been created. Are there any ongoing studies of the biology of that novel species to answer the question: is this interaction for our long-term benefit or for the self-interest
Mhm.
of the aliens? So I'm all
Yeah, and
about ways of getting evidence,
yeah,
hard,
and
concrete scientific evidence.
right, and I'm not. Don't get me wrong. I'm not opposed to evidence collecting. I'm simply suggesting that maybe a hypothesis, although difficult to test, uh, that is more far-fetched, is worth including, and then seeking evidence to support such a far-fetched hypothesis is all I'm suggesting. Not necessarily yourself, but anybody else in the field. I think a lot of abduction cases and abductees, um, they have an experience and they read books about. I've done the same about other people's experiences, and they incorporate the ideas and concepts they read in those other experiences into their own experience, and so it becomes a little bit of a hodgepodge of what they actually experienced versus what they perceived to have experienced because of the supporting literature that they've read. Um, I'm just simply thinking that maybe there's another hypothesis out there that nobody has dared to suggest, that would be worth putting forward and then researching to determine if any of the current supporting evidence for the existing theories would support such a new theory.
I can't think of another question uh, that our species needs to answer that almost demands us to think way outside the box. This is a very this is a very challenging phenomenon, and nothing. I don't consider anything far fetched. Some of the greatest breakthroughs in science at the time they were first publicized, the rest of the scientific community looked down on the theory as being quite irrational. The ideas of a lunatic in some cases. Yet later, decades later, the scientist who had the breakthrough was proven to be right. And
Yeah.
so I don't rule. I think we should keep our minds open to anything. There's someone in the category who's been put in the category of a thought leader in this area, by the name of Whitley Strieber, who
Mm-hmm.
has some very unique and unusual theories about what the interaction between non-human intelligences and human beings is all about. And I think we should consider all of these theories before we're in a position to be able to test them. So we're
Yeah.
in agreement on that.
Yeah. And I think that so often people land on something that that, let's say, resonates with them, and then when new theories or ideas come along that push against that the thing that resonates with them, they tend to immediately kind of reject it as, heresy or whatever the case may be. But in an area where we actually know very little in reality about what is happening and why it's happening, to reject any proposed theory, I think, is a false step.
I agree. I've had other investigators and in one case, a podcast host actually asked me if I've developing any experimental designs to look at this question of how our consciousness is affected by interactions with alien beings that may be abducting human beings. Are there certain types of experiments we can do to measure the effects on our cognitive abilities, on our extrasensory abilities? I think there's very little work done in this area because so much of what is being done by some of the groups that are kind of working in the shadows now. Avi Loeb's group, Gary Nolan's group, and others. There are groups in Europe, particularly in France. I'm not really sure they're exploring all these novel theories that do have merit, that can generate legitimate hypothesis. But to begin with, I'm starting with what I feel is a very legitimate hypothesis that there has been a genetic modification of the human genome, because there have been so many investigated abduction cases in the hundreds, if not thousands, involving the acquisition of genetic material from the abductee. Right. And there's just so much in the literature about that. It's one place to start, where start generating hypotheses and trying to find ways of testing them. But I agree, so much more that we need to look at and investigate scientifically.
But I think that, in your choice of picking an area, right, picking a specific hypothesis and testing until you can test no more and either prove or disprove. And as you know, as a scientist, the absence of data is not an incorrect collection. It's just that there's just no data to be collected on that particular test, and so you move on, you adjust your test, and you reconduct your experiment. I guess the absence of data is data. I would say that, and so. But like you said, whenever you come to the point where you can go no further on that particular hypothesis, you have to swivel a little bit, shift your track, and try something different, add to it, adjust, whatever the case may be. And maybe that's the way that Avi Loeb and all those others are approaching it as well. Until they have taken their hypothesis until it can go no farther, they're going to continue at it and ignore those novel ideas. And then, potentially incorporate once they've reached a stopping point.
It's so frustrating, and I'm echo the frustrations that they've mentioned of not being able to have the information that we believe the government has that can kind of point them in the right direction, that would save so much time, so much resources, and so much energy. If we had something in the way of disclosure, and then this dissemination of what the government has learned to the scientists that are just, clamoring to get the data and begin investigating. But until that happens, we're kind of all in the woods here, trying to figure this out on our own. But that's why people like you and I are part of disclosure, because the government's not discussing what needs to be discussed. it's left to people like you and I, and hopefully there'll be people listening to the podcast that have ideas that they may or may not be scientists that they can share with others that kind of provoke more disclosure and more investigations that result in learning things that the government is not going to be able to learn because of it's perhaps doesn't know how to approach this. It doesn't want to admit it, the reality of the phenomenon, and therefore, as it were, has its head buried in the sand on this regarding this phenomenon. But I think that we need to really look at so many different hypotheses, no matter how far-fetched they may sound, and bring as many scientists from as many disciplines into the conversation. But here's the other thing: the great majority of scientists all over the world, especially in this country, has taken the same approach that the government has taken.
Right.
They first and foremost won't look in our direction or look at what we're looking at because they refuse to acknowledge the reality of the phenomenon. But if we only had enough scientists, as I say, that can be part of an interdisciplinary investigation of this, we would be able to explore so many of these theories where scientists in the field of psychology could be sharing information with gravitational wave physicists, and there'd be so much cross fertilization of the research in so many different disciplines if we could all come together, admit the phenomenon is real, and be open to studying every aspect of it, no matter how astounding and unbelievable it appears on first observation. This is part of my dream. Part of my dream. I don't know. I hope I'm going to be here to see it, but I don't know.
All of our science that we have right now was once a far-fetched dream. I mean, it's the nature of the evolution of scientific understanding. So the blatant disregard to acknowledge or to even I actually have a little bit of a bone to pick with Neil deGrasse Tyson because he is such a voice in the scientific community, but yet he treats the topic as if it's a joke. Just that he is, I think, a big proponent that facilitates the ongoing nature of the taboo. And if just him or Bill Nye or some of the other more social scientists, so to speak, were to just make the statement, you know what, maybe it is, maybe just say maybe instead of making a joke about it or assuming that all that there is to know about whatever your area of study is, that this is so far beyond the realms of possibility. In a way, behaving much like, and I'm sorry to say it, I hope I don't offend anybody, but much like early church, and that any science that proposed that the Earth was not the center of the universe was heresy. Much the same way, these areas of exploration for us as a people, I think, is the nature of why those contact, abductions, whatever the case may be, again, that use of questioning our reality and wanting to understand our role not only in our society, our planet, our solar system, our galaxy, our cluster, and so on and so forth. It's understanding, I think, what it means to define ourselves as conscious, as intelligent, as human. So bottom line, sorry, rant over. I think that it would go a long way towards lifting the taboo if some of those more social scientists would acknowledge the legitimate existence of the phenomenon. They don't have to explain it, they don't have to speak to it, but just to acknowledge that it exists.
Well, Einstein had said that when he was told of UFO reports, he said, I believe people have seen something that they can't explain. I haven't the faintest idea of what they've seen, and I'm not the least bit interested, because he was asking for data, some type of observational scientific data, to sink his teeth in so he can make some type of a contribution to the discussion. But, I wonder if any of these scientists, like deGrasse Tyson, who you mentioned, have even looked at the observational data. I've tried to get my book in the hands of some of these scientists. I've tried to contact many of them, including Dr. deGrasse Tyson, just to get him to look at the research that has been done by the abduction investigators.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of it is done in the most scientifically advanced way. Not all, but I think the problem I have with so much of the scientific community is its total ignorance of not just the abduction phenomenon, but the broader UFO phenomenon. And I think that's where we have to start. We just have to get them to consider the question: are aliens or extraterrestrials here or not? Mm-hmm. And look at the data that the investigators have obtained, which is extensive, before just dismissing it. One positive thing I'll have to say is I'm very encouraged by the fact that a scientist who is one of the leaders in the field of founder, I would have to say, of the field of string theory in physics, Michio Kaku, mm-hmm. is really on board as much as anyone. And he's a very high standing in the physics community. Even before he was written so many, popular books that deal with the concepts of quantum mechanics that he's trying to explain to the lay person. Even before that, he had a very open mind for some reason about the subject. But it's just too few and far between to find scientists of his caliber that are willing to listen. I'm hoping.
Sorry,
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to mention the two people that prominent scientists, one in immunology, Dr. Gary Nolan, the other in astrophysics, Dr. Loeb, that are very well-meaning, but I don't know how much they're able to communicate in terms of what they're learning, how much they're able to communicate to the general public, that would tend to persuade them that they're taking the phenomenon seriously. Right. I don't think that, as far as I'm concerned, even from those two individuals, it doesn't come across that they, I think they appear to have an open mind, but beyond that, I'm not so sure. I have to say, Dr. Nolan says he's 100% certain they're here. Doesn't really say why. I wish he would talk more about some of the evidence that he may have that he's privy to.
Yeah, and I think that gets back to kind of the nature of, I think, the scientific community is what's the phrase, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And so, for
Carl Sagan,
so for Dr. Nolan to say, hey, they're here, well, where's your evidence to back it up? And so, that's the difficult part, I think, for the scientific community is you want to make the grand statement, sure, provide evidence that supports it. And the difficulty, I think, lies in that sometimes that evidence is very personal in nature. It's experience. It's I saw one in my bedroom. And so the action of coming forward with that personal experience, like you did in your book, can oftentimes lead to ridicule within the scientific community, which kind of leads me to a question that I wanted to ask you from the beginning, which is, how have your peers responded to your experience in your book?
Well, just as many people in the UFO community have not really responded even after I've contacted them. Many have, but many haven't. The problem is many people who aren't scientists, many people who are in the scientific community, they're willing to talk about, the appearance of UFOs and whether or not they represent some advanced technology from a, from a foreign power, whether they represent a U.S. experimental program that's been ongoing for the past few decades, or whether they're from someplace else. They're willing to discuss that. But once you bring up, the topic of alien abduction, no one wants to go anywhere near that.
It's a bridge too far for most.
You can't talk about it scientifically because they don't even want to discuss it or to be heard discussing it. So I'm not going to hear anything encouraging from colleagues, although people have contacted me who are, either in a related scientific discipline, or there were professional people, or total non-believers before reading the book, but claim their eyes are open and they are much more open-minded about the subject, whether it's UFOs or alien abduction, after reading the book. But I have to say my top goal of writing and publishing the book is, as the first or the only mainstream scientist that's going on the record with his alien abduction experiences, my main goal is to try to get not just the broader community, but scientists in particular, to pay attention to what I'm talking about, because I'm hoping that as a scientist, they're going to be more open to considering the possibility. And so that the book has the potential to legitimize this type of scientific investigation of this particular topic, because a scientist has described experiences from that perspective, from a scientific perspective. And also, I know there are a lot of professional people that have a science background, whether they're physicians, engineers, biologists, or heart scientists, have had very similar experiences to the ones I've had, that I'm hoping would be encouraged to come forward and add their reports to the list of reports. But now what would be most helpful was with that we'd hear more and more reports coming from people with a scientific background. So that's what I hope is one of the results of my publishing the book.
Yeah, and I think that, like you said, I would also say that there's quite a few, I think, scientists within the UFO community today. I mean, I can, on one hand, count people that I know that either have a scientific background or at least have a degree in a science topic, and then did something else different with their professional career, but at least have degrees in that area, that are doing scientific research, of the same regard. Kathleen Martin, for example, is another, of the Betty and Barney Hill. It's her their niece. She has written several books, very much from a scientific approach and scientific analysis. She just conducted a survey having to do with consciousness awareness, and so I think she's got a book coming out soon that dives into that. Bottom line, I think that there's a lot of scientists in the UFO community, that maybe there needs to be some sort of a think tank that's spun up that gives people an opportunity to get engaged. It's one thing to say, I've had an experience, now what? But it's another to say, you've had an experience, come join our think tank where we're testing novel ideas about what this stuff is, et cetera, et cetera. And I think secondarily, if uh, I think more would be accomplished from a scientific perspective from probably more mainstream academic institutes if there were grant funding made available to research any of this stuff. If the government put out a grant to find out does consciousness exist? I mean, I think institutes would be all over it. Psychology and psychiatry departments across the country would be a part of that. So if they put out a grant for determine if ET is visiting us, people would be all over it. I know that's not the way the grant would be written, but I'm just saying it's um, if money were put towards the answers, more and more mainstream scientists, I think, would get on board.
Well, this investigator initiated type of work and proposals can could generate a lot of information, but I'm hoping that our government can set up an independent agency, ideally separate from the military, like NASA,
Mhm.
where the study would be more organized, and they'd have an annual budget from Congress, and would bring, as I said before, top scientists like a Manhattan Project, uh,
Mhm.
but from a variety of disciplines, because this phenomenon, the implications of it, and the different aspects of the phenomenon requires such a broad type of interdisciplinary study that I think it can only be done in in a new agency like NASA. I don't think it could even be part of NASA, though NASA has done some biological studies, but still, I think we need a new agency, and where there is free sharing of information, not the rigid
Mhm.
compartmentalization of information that takes place in within military research, that is really stifling to any type of um, you know
Yeah,
breakthroughs that could be made in any area of science.
yeah, it's you're very. I mean, you're very correct. I mean, uh, much like we spoke of before, you reach a certain point in your hypothesis where you can go no further, being able to reach out to colleagues elsewhere who may be conducting similar research to see, if they could, accompany you or work with you or whatever the case would be on the study that you're working on would be key towards furthering the investigation. But without that open line of communication and that open acceptance of the topic, I don't think that will ever be the case.
That's the thing, and this is why government disclosure would have such a dramatic effect on the national psyche. And you know, I tend to think we have our government knows more than any other. The other governments know about the phenomenon, know a lot about it, but I
Mm-hmm.
think our government knows more than any, at least based on everything I've read over the years and decades, leads me to believe that. So I know a lot of people are saying, ufologists in particular, that we don't need to have formal disclosure. All we need is to have individual revelations of people that are being shared within a certain community of ufologists that, as you correctly say, is now including more and more scientists. I still say it's not enough, but
Yeah,
I just
drop in
think
the bucket.
I'm really skeptical that it's going to have as dramatic effect as having the formal disclosure
Uh-huh.
by the government. Um, and
Yeah,
boy, it doesn't look like
I
it's
just
happening in the latest
yeah,
report.
I don't. I was on Space Radio a few weeks back with Dave Scott, and I was asked the same question, and around disclosure. I honestly don't think that we will see a formalized disclosure from the government simply because of the skeletons in the closet that would come spilling out if they admitted to having. Yes, you're right. We've known since '47. That brings into question so many other conspiracy theory type things that are out there it would light a fire under so many people. I don't think the government will ever give a full disclosure. I think they might give a since 2005 we've known, or 2004 since the Nimitz incident. They might say, yeah, we didn't know anything before then, but since 2004 we've known. They might give that, but I don't think we'll ever get all the way back to 1947 or before. But that being said, I don't see the difficulty. I think lies in the the national security intelligence aspect. It's a MUFON, for example, I think has provided some reports to the government that they've collected, and as soon as they hit the government, they become classified, and MUFON no longer has eyes on. It's the overclassification of information is really the issue, and so it's there's maybe 90%, 80%, 70% even of the information that the government has collected may not truly be classified, or may not truly be needing a classification of top secret or whatever, so that it could be provided to scientific organizations around the country, around the world. But because there's such a tight seal on anything having to do with it, mistype a memo and accidentally type UFO or UAP, next thing you know, it's classified. That may be an exaggeration, but the idea is that overclassification, that's what I think is preventing any type of formalized progress on understanding the phenomenon. Um, and I think, frankly, the only way that's ever going to change is when maybe, my kids are 10, when their generation become the next military leaders, they might decide that, hey, this stuff is way too classified. People are ready to know, et cetera, and it starts to open doors. But I think it's going to be a couple generations down the road before we might actually see a full disclosure from the government.
Unfortunately, yeah. That
So
that leaves that might leave us out. We may not be around to see it, but I'm still hopeful. But
yeah,
this last particular report, is really frustrating, because a year ago the government acknowledged that the AF the UAPs had unconventional performance characteristics, and now, a year later, their overall conclusion is that, well, they're not using that term as often, as with as much emphasis. They're simply saying that, well, a lot of what can't be explained falling within the UAP phenomenon is most likely attributable to experimental programs taking place within our country. So it looks like we're going in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
But
I was just going to say this program is headed for mothballs. Either that, or it's going to continue to conduct itself in secrecy behind closed doors, and the public is going to continue to get fed these, kind of BS reports.
Right, I see other countries, particularly in Europe, that are much more open about this, more willing to have a hand in glove relationship between government and the private UFO investigative organizations, to study every part of the phenomenon and share a lot of information. I've been contacted by some of these European what I would call organizations that are similar to MUFON, but they probably know a lot more from their government than MUFON is finding out from our government.
Right. Yeah.
I may learn more dealing with foreign investigators, because they have more access to quote unquote classified information, which may not be classified in UK or France or Italy or some other European. They're really much more open in a variety of European countries. So I'm actually at the point where I'm starting to interact more with those ufologists that have a lot of scientists in their organization.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, that may allow me to write my next book in this particular area of inquiry. But again,
So,
also including the alien phenomenon as well.
right. So I want to be cognizant of time. We've gone for about an hour, and I usually try to keep these about an hour. So, Bruce, to wrap up, if there's anything, so number one, anybody who's listening, I'm going to have a link to Bruce's book on Amazon in both the description of the podcast as well as on YouTube. And then I guess, Bruce, anything else that you'd like to let the folks that are listening know in regards to your book, in regards to yourself?
Two things. The name of the book is Dominion Lost, the Scientists' Own Alien Abduction Encounters. There's a longer, unabridged version, as I mentioned, and a shorter abridged version that deals almost exclusively with my own personal abduction experiences without a lot of scientific analysis. And that book is 200 pages. And that the second thing is, please, if anyone has any questions, any comments, any feedback of any kind they want to make regarding what they read in either of those books, my email, I can be reached at dominionlost@gmail.com, which is the name of the book, dominionlost@gmail.com. Feel free to send me any material or questions or comments you might have regarding my books. I look forward to it.
That's great, Bruce. I really appreciate the people who are willing to receive that feedback. A lot of people are not, and so I applaud you again there. So thank you all so much for listening and for tuning in for this episode of Mysterial Experiences. If you've had an experience and you'd like to share it with the listenership, or you'd like to come on the air and talk about your experiences, please let me know. You can email me at Josh Rutledge, that's RUTLEDGE, at mysterialexperiences.com. And until next time, I hope you have a good weekend and a good week. Bye.